Samuel, a homeless man who had endured countless hardships, felt extremely wronged. All he did was take in a stray dog, yet he was labeled as a dog thief, spurned by others, and forced to part ways with the dog he had come to rely on. But what happened next completely transformed his dismal fate. Hey everyone, welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's get started. In the heart of the city, where towering skyscrapers dominate the skyline, there lies a neglected underbelly. Among its forgotten corners, 52-year-old Samuel Johnson, a homeless man, ekes out a meager existence. Once, his life was a tapestry of hope and happiness. He was a skilled carpenter, whose hands could shape what into beautiful creations. At home, he was greeted by the warm smiles of his wife, Marie, and the exuberant laughter of their children, Tyrone and Aisha. Their modest house was filled with love and the promise of a bright future. However, fate has a cruel way of intervening. One crisp autumn evening, as Samuel was driving home from a long shift at the construction site, looking forward to a quiet night with his family, his world was turned upside down. The phone call that changed everything came just as he pulled into the driveway. Marie's voice, filled with panic, informed him of a terrible accident. Tyrone and Aisha had been rushed to the hospital. Samuel's heart raced as he sped towards the emergency room, praying for a miracle. But the next few hours were a nightmare of white corridors, antiseptic smells, and the solemn faces of doctors. By morning, his worst fears were realized. Marie and the children were gone, victims of a drunk driver who had run a red light. Samuel, who had not been in the car, was left alone, a broken man in a suddenly cold and meaningless world. In the weeks and months that followed, Samuel was consumed by grief. He tried to outrun the pain by throwing himself into his work, but the physical demands of his job, combined with his emotional distress, took a toll on his body. He suffered a severe back injury that rendered him unable to perform his duties. Without a job, and with his savings dwindling, he turned to alcohol as a way to numb the pain. But alcohol only made things worse. It clouded his judgment, leading to poor decisions, and emptied his pockets. Soon, he could no longer afford the mortgage on the house that now felt like a haunted place, filled with memories of his lost family. Eviction notices piled up, and in a drunken stupor, he ignored them. One cold morning, he found himself on the street with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes. Now, every day is a struggle for survival. He wakes up in his tattered tent, the sounds of the awakening city filtering through the thin fabric. He reaches for his weathered blanket, trying to ward off the morning chill. His hands, marked with the lines of hardship, fumble as he packs his few possessions. He knows he must hurry before the local beat cop makes his rounds. As he emerges from the tent, his once proud shoulders are now slumped under the weight of his circumstances. His dark skin is lined with sorrow, and his salt and pepper beard is tangled. It has been weeks since he had a proper shower or seen his reflection in a mirror. He makes his way to his usual spot near a busy intersection, carrying a cardboard sign. The sign reads, "Hungry and homeless. Any help appreciated. God bless." He settles onto the cold pavement, propping the sign against his legs. The morning rush hour brings a steady stream of pedestrians. Most of them avert their eyes as they hurry past, some muttering under their breath. He notices the difference in treatment between himself and a white homeless man begging a block away. While his cup remains nearly empty, the other man seems to fill steadily throughout the day. This observation fills him with a sense of hopelessness. A group of teenagers approaches, laughing and joking. One of the boys, wanting to show off, pulls out a $20 bill from his wallet. He waves it in front of Samuel's face, raising his hopes. But then, with a cruel laugh, the boy tears the bill in half and lets the pieces flutter to the ground. The group walks away, leaving Samuel staring at the torn money, a stark reminder of his invisibility and the casual cruelty of others. As the sun begins to set, Samuel gathers his few coins and makes his way back to his tent. The day's meager earnings will barely buy him a meal, let alone help him escape his current situation. He feels the weight of despair pressing down on him. Back at his makeshift home, he sits outside the tent, watching as the city transforms in the fading light. The streets that were once filled with bustling commuters and shoppers now take on a different character. The night people emerge, other homeless individuals, sex workers, and those who prefer to conduct their business in the shadows. Samuel pulls out a small, battered notebook from his pocket. It is one of the few possessions he has managed to hold on to from his previous life. Inside, there is a faded photograph of Marie, Tyrone, and Aisha, their smiling faces frozen in a moment of happiness that seems like a lifetime ago. His fingers trace the outline of their faces as he whispers a quiet prayer. "I'm sorry," he murmurs, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I've become this." A single tear rolls down his weathered cheek, falling onto the photograph. As the night deepens, Samuel retreats into his tent, curling up on his thin sleeping bag. The sounds of the city, distant sirens, shouts, and the rumble of late night traffic never truly fade. But for him, the loudest sound is the relentless drumbeat of his own thoughts, a constant reminder of all he has lost and the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that stand between him and any hope of a better life. Little does he know that tomorrow will bring an unexpected encounter that will change everything. The next evening, Samuel, his stomach growling, was scavenging for food behind a busy city center restaurant. The alluring smell of grilled food filled the air, a bitter reminder of his hunger. Among the dumpster's scraps, he found a half-eaten burger. Just as he was about to take a bite, a soft rustling from a nearby alley caught his attention. Despite his caution, Samuel was drawn to the sound. In the dim alley, he saw a dog in a pitiful state. Its ribs protruded through matted, dirty fur, and its eyes held a look of fear and desperation that Samuel recognized well. The dog's leg was at an odd angle, showing an old, unhealed injury. Hesitating, Samuel knew hungry animals could be dangerous, but the dog didn't seem aggressive. He called softly, "Hey there," and the dog's ears perked up. Slowly, Samuel took a step closer, then another. As he got near, he could see the full extent of the dog's poor condition. Without thinking, Samuel broke off a piece of the burger and held it out. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. Are you hungry, boy?" he said gently. The dog inched forward, its nose twitching at the smell of food. After a long moment, it sniffed Samuel's hand and quickly snatched the food. Encouraged, Samuel offered another piece. This time, the dog came more readily, taking the food gently. As it ate, Samuel placed his hand on the dog's head. The dog flinched at first, but then leaned into the touch. "You're alone too, huh?" "We're in the same boat," Samuel murmured. As night fell, Samuel shared the rest of his burger with the dog. He talked about his past, Marie, the kids, and his lost dreams. The dog listened, its tail thumping now and then. When it was time to leave, the dog followed Samuel, looking at him with hopeful eyes. Samuel sighed and decided to let it come. "All right, but I can't promise much," he said. On the way back to his tent, Samuel thought the dog needed a name. Looking at its shadowy form in the dim light, he said, "How about Shadow?" The dog whined in response, as if agreeing. They reached the tent just as dawn was breaking. Shadow went inside and curled up in a corner. Samuel felt a new sense of warmth and companionship as he lay down. For the first time in years, he slept a bit more peacefully with a glimmer of hope. In the following days, Samuel's life changed. He had a reason to wake up, taking care of Shadow. Each morning, they set out together. Samuel talked to Shadow as if it understood, and Shadow's tail wagged in response. Their foraging became more purposeful. Samuel learned the best times to check dumpsters for food suitable for a dog. A week after meeting Shadow, Samuel found a bag of day-old pastries behind a high-end cafe. His face lit up as he shared a croissant with Shadow. "Look, Shadow, we're having a feast," he said, and for the first time in months, he laughed genuinely. Their bond grew stronger. Samuel always gave Shadow the larger share of food. He told himself it was to help the dog regain strength, but he also felt a new sense of responsibility. During quiet times, he shared memories of his family with Shadow, and the dog listened intently. As weeks passed, both Samuel and Shadow changed. Shadow's coat began to look better, and his limp improved. His eyes, once dull, now sparkled with affection. Samuel also stood a bit straighter and tried to look better, using public restrooms to clean up and combing his beard. However, life on the streets was still tough. Racism became more obvious. One day, a well-dressed woman approached them. She was friendly to Shadow at first, but turned cold when she saw Samuel. "You should find a proper home for the dog," she said coldly. Samuel was angry but tried to stay calm. Shadow pressed against him, and he said, "It's okay. We have each other." Samuel also noticed more police patrols in wealthy areas and heard about break-ins. The city felt tense. One afternoon, in an affluent neighborhood, he overheard people talking about security. He quickly left with Shadow, knowing trouble could be coming. As they rounded a corner, they almost bumped into a police officer. The officer was suspicious at first, but after seeing Shadow, his tone softened a bit. "Keep moving. This isn't a good place for you," he said. Samuel was relieved and continued on his way. That night, in the tent, Samuel held Shadow close. "We have to be careful. Things are changing," he whispered. Little did he know that these changes would soon turn his life upside down again. A seemingly ordinary day began for Samuel. He roused early, with Shadow by his side in the tattered tent. Despite his worries, he managed a small smile at Shadow's warm welcome. "Morning, buddy," he said, stroking the dog's fur. "Time to face another day." As they left the tent, the city was slowly waking up. The usual city sounds were still soft. Samuel stretched his stiff joints from sleeping on the hard ground, and Shadow imitated him, bringing a brief chuckle to Samuel. They started their daily search for food, checking dumpsters behind eateries. Samuel was deep in thought about the city's growing tension. He was so distracted that he almost missed the sudden change in the air. Shadow noticed first, his ears perking up at an approaching sound. Then, Samuel saw two sleek black Mercedes cars coming down the street. They looked out of place in this poor neighborhood, their shiny exteriors reflecting the morning sun. Samuel felt a sense of unease. Expensive cars here often meant trouble. To his shock, the car stopped near him. Shadow pressed close, sensing Samuel's worry. The rear door of the first car opened, and a well-dressed man stepped out. He was clearly wealthy, with a costly suit and perfectly groomed hair. Another man emerged from the driver's side, looking tough and ready for action. From the second car, two women got out. The older one, likely the first man's wife, had an air of privilege. The younger woman, a teenager, seemed out of place and nervous. When she saw Samuel and Shadow, her eyes fixed on them, making Samuel uncomfortable. Another large man got out of the second car's driver's side, taking a protective position near the women. The well-dressed man, clearly in charge, walked toward Samuel. His eyes were full of anger. "You, with the dog, come here," he commanded. Samuel hesitated. Every part of him wanted to run, but he knew he couldn't. Slowly, he stood up, his hand on Shadow, who was growling softly. "Easy, boy," Samuel said, trying to stay calm. As Samuel walked closer, he felt everyone's eyes on him. The man sneered at him. "That's close enough," he said. The woman, probably his wife, tried to calm him. "Robert, let's not be hasty," she said. But Robert ignored her. Samuel asked politely, "Sir, how can I help you?" Robert snapped, "Don't act stupid. You know why we're here." Samuel was confused and scared. Before he could reply, the younger woman, Emily, stepped forward, looking at Shadow with recognition. She seemed about to speak, but her mother pulled her back. Robert moved closer to Samuel. Shadow growled louder, and the bodyguards tensed. "Sir, there's a mistake," Samuel said, trying to keep his voice steady. Robert shouted, "Shut up. I know your type thieves." Samuel was indignant, but knew arguing was bad. Robert then asked, "Where did you get that dog?" Samuel was taken aback. "I found him. He was starving and hurt, so I took care of him," he said. Robert laughed coldly. "You can't even take care of yourself." Robert called Emily over. "Tell me if this is Rex," he said. Emily walked forward, and Shadow's behavior changed. He stopped growling and wagged his tail. Emily cried, "Rex, is it really you?" Shadow, or Rex, seemed to respond to the name. Samuel was shocked. "I don't understand." "I found him," he said. Robert accused him. "You expect us to believe our valuable dog just ended up in an alley with you? We were robbed last night, and you're pretending to have found him." Emily took Rex's collar. Samuel pleaded, "Please, let me say goodbye." Robert was disgusted. "You stole him. You should be glad we're not arresting you." Samuel watched in shock as Emily led Rex away. Rex looked back, confused. The cars drove off, and Samuel fell to his knees. Rex was gone, and he was left broken. He wept, his sobs echoing in the cold city streets that had once again taken everything from him. The days following Rex's departure were some of the darkest Samuel had endured since losing his family. The void left by the dog's absence seemed insurmountable, consuming every aspect of his life. He found himself merely going through the motions of survival, devoid of any real purpose. His thoughts constantly circled back to Rex and the wealthy family that had taken him away. As word of the confrontation spread through the neighborhood, Samuel noticed a significant shift in how people treated him. Previously, he had been largely ignored, but now he was actively avoided. People crossed the street when they saw him coming, clutching their belongings tightly and casting fearful glances his way. The other homeless individuals in the area, who had once been at least tolerant of his presence, now kept their distance. Samuel overheard whispered conversations and fragments of gossip about the thief who had targeted a wealthy family. Some expressed admiration for his supposed boldness, while others condemned him for bringing unwanted attention to their community. One night, as Samuel huddled in his usual spot, trying to find warmth in his threadbare blanket, a group of rough-looking homeless men surrounded him. "You've caused us nothing but trouble," one of them snarled. "The cops are everywhere now, hassling all of us because of you." Before Samuel could defend himself or explain, they attacked. Samuel curled up into a ball, attempting to protect himself as best he could, but he was outnumbered and caught off guard. When the assault was over, the men vanished into the night, taking with them Samuel's few remaining possessions. They stole his blanket, his small stash of food, and even the battered notebook that held the precious photo of his family. Lying there, exhausted and bruised, Samuel felt the last remnants of his hope slipping away. Samuel became more isolated than ever. His usual begging and scavenging spots were now off limits, guarded jealously by others who saw him as a threat to their own precarious existence. He was forced to venture further afield in search of food and safe places to sleep, constantly looking over his shoulder, always on edge, fearing encounters with Robert or the police. One particularly cold night, about a week after the incident with Robert, Samuel huddled in the doorway of an abandoned building, trying to shield himself from the biting wind. His stomach growled painfully, a constant reminder of his hunger. As he pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself, his thoughts turned to Rex. He wondered if the dog was safe and warm, if he was being well cared for. Despite all that had happened, Samuel couldn't bring himself to resent Rex or the family that had taken him. He simply hoped that Rex was happy, that all the hardships they had endured together had led to a better life for the dog. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, Samuel's dreams were filled with memories of his past life. He saw Marie's smiling face, heard Tyrone's laughter as they played basketball in the driveway, and felt Aisha's small hand in his as they walked to the park. The dreams then shifted, and suddenly Rex was there too, running and playing with his children, barking joyfully as Samuel threw a stick for him to fetch. Samuel woke up with a start, tears streaming down his face. The pain of loss, both old and new, threatened to overwhelm him. In that moment, the temptation he had resisted for weeks while caring for Rex returned with renewed strength. Samuel found himself standing at the corner of the street, his eyes fixed on the flickering neon sign of the liquor store across the road. His hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the internal struggle raging within him. For weeks after losing Rex, he had fought against the siren call of alcohol, holding on to the memory of the dog's unwavering loyalty and the promise he had made to himself to stay sober. But now, with Rex gone and his world in shambles, the temptation was almost unbearable. Samuel took a step towards the store, then stopped. His conscience warred with his despair. He thought of Rex and how disappointed the dog would be to see him like this. But then the memory of Robert's sneering face and cruel words flooded back, drowning out all other thoughts. "Just one bottle," Samuel muttered to himself, his voice hoarse, just to take the edge off. With a heavy heart, he crossed the street and entered the store. The harsh fluorescent lights inside made him squint, and he felt exposed and vulnerable. He shuffled to the back where the cheapest liquor was kept, acutely aware of the cashier's eyes following him. Just as he reached for a bottle, a familiar voice called out, "Samuel, is that you?" Samuel turned to see Mr. Chun, the owner of the small grocery store where he and Rex used to scavenge for discarded produce. Mr. Chen's kind face was etched with concern. I heard what happened, Mr. Chen said softly, approaching Samuel. About the dog and the accusations. I'm so sorry, my friend. Samuel's throat tightened, and he was unable to speak. Mr. Chen's kindness, unexpected in the midst of all his troubles, threatened to break the fragile hold he had on his emotions. You know, Mr. Chen continued gently, taking the bottle from Samuel's hand and placing it back on the shelf. I have some soup left over from dinner. My wife always makes too much. Why don't you come to the store and have some? It's much better than this stuff. For a moment, Samuel was tempted. The offer of a warm meal and compassion was almost enough to break through his despair. But the pain of losing Rex, the humiliation of being labeled a thief, and the overwhelming weight of his circumstances were too much. I can't, Mr. Chen, Samuel mumbled, reaching again for the bottle. Thank you, but I just can't. Mr. Chen's face fell, but he nodded in understanding. Samuel paid for the liquor with his meager earnings, avoiding Mr. Chen's gaze as he left the store. He heard Mr. Chen call out, "Take care of yourself, Samuel. Please." But Samuel was already succumbing to the numbing embrace of his addiction. He made his way to a secluded alley, his usual spot since losing his tent. With shaking hands, he pulled out the cheap bottle of liquor from his bag. As the alcohol burned its way down his throat, he found himself talking to the empty space beside him, where Rex should have been. I'm sorry, boy. He slurred, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I let you down. In the weeks that followed, Samuel's condition deteriorated rapidly. He drank more, begged less, and gradually lost the will to go on. The accusation of theft hung over him like a dark cloud, making it even more difficult for him to find odd jobs or receive assistance. People who might have once given him some change or a kind word now crossed the street to avoid him. His appearance, which he had started to take care of during his time with Rex, once again became unkempt. His beard grew wild, his clothes became dirtier and more ragged, and the spark of hope that had briefly flickered in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a dull, hopeless gaze. Samuel's days blurred together in a haze of alcohol and despair. He moved from one makeshift shelter to another, never staying in one place for long, always on the verge of consciousness. The city, which had once held some glimmer of potential even in its harshest moments, now felt like a vast, uncaring wasteland. It was in this state of drunkenness, dishevelment, and utter despair that fate intervened once again. In his most desperate state, slumped in a doorway with an almost empty bottle in hand, Samuel heard a familiar voice. Caroline, Emily, over here. I found him. He looked up, his vision blurry, to see Robert standing there. But this time, Robert's face was filled with shock and remorse instead of anger. Oh my God, Robert said softly. What have we done? Samuel saw that Robert wasn't alone. His wife and daughter were there, and between them was Rex, straining at his leash. Rex, Samuel whispered, barely believing his eyes. Rex barked, his tail wagging furiously, and lunged forward to reach Samuel, licking his face and whining with joy. Robert was quick to apologize. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. The real thief was caught last week. He confessed to everything, including leaving a door open, which let Rex escape. We've been searching for you to make things right. Samuel, still in a daze, could only focus on the warm presence of Rex in his arms. Robert continued, his voice filled with regret. Mr. Johnson, Samuel, what we did to you was unforgivable. We jumped to conclusions based on prejudice. We want to make amends. We'd like to offer you a job as a caretaker for our animals, including Rex, and help with tasks around our house and garden. You'd have your own room in our home. Caroline stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Please give us a chance to fix this. Emily nodded eagerly, adding, You can be with Rex every day. Samuel was stunned. He looked down at Rex, then back at the family. A glimmer of hope, long extinguished, began to rekindle in his heart. With trembling hands, he reached out and took Robert's hand. The transition wasn't easy for Samuel. In the Mitchell's grand home, he often felt out of place. There were times when the temptation to return to alcohol was strong. But Rex was always by his side, a constant reminder of why he was trying to change. Slowly, Samuel started to heal. He threw himself into his work. His carpentry skills, which had lain dormant for so long, came back as he took on small projects around the house. He found satisfaction in caring for the animals and tending to the garden. The Mitchells treated him with respect, mindful of their past mistake. As the months passed, Samuel's relationship with the Mitchells grew deeper. Robert sought his advice. Caroline included him in family dinners, and Emily, with her youthful energy, helped Samuel open up. She encouraged him to share stories of his past and dreams for the future. One evening, as Samuel sat on the back porch with Rex at his feet, watching the sunset, he realized something profound. The hole in his heart left by the loss of his family would never fully heal, but it was being filled with something new. It wasn't a replacement, but a different kind of family, born from redemption, second chances, and compassion. Samuel reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "We made it, boy," he said softly. "We finally made a home." Rex's tail wagged in response, his eyes fixed on Samuel with unwavering loyalty. Inside the house, Samuel could hear the Mitchells preparing dinner, their laughter and the sounds of a happy home floating through the open windows. This new life was a far cry from his lonely days on the streets. But Samuel knew he would never forget his past. Rex had been his savior, leading him from the brink of despair to a life filled with purpose and belonging. Their story was a testament to the power of second chances and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.